Yeah, we are live. So, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us. I, Snigdha Basu, project lead of the Disobedient Women series at tellmeyourstory.biz, welcome you to the third episode of our talk series. I'm privileged to have with us Sheila Kumar, Stacy Kong, and Mahima Kukreja today to talk about portrayal of women as vamps across pop culture and media. Tellmeyourstory.biz calls for submissions on the story prompt Disobedient Women. Other than that, registrations are also open for the Writing Program Season 5 in association with Rupa Publications. Let me begin today's session by introducing the panelists this evening. We have with us Stacy Kong. Stacy is a writer, editor, and founder of Friday Things, a weekly newsletter that delivers smart takes on week's biggest pop culture stories, or at least the ones she can't stop thinking about. Her bylines have appeared in publications including Maclean's, The Globe and Mail, Reader's Digest, and En route. And she has worked at some of the largest magazine brands in Canada, including Claire, Canadian Living, House and Home, and Chatelaine. She is also an instructor at Centennial College in Toronto. Welcome, Stacey.
Thank you.
We also have with us Sheila Kumar. Sheila is a former advertising copywriter turned journalist who has filed stories from all over India and abroad for a whole lot of publications for more than 2 decades now. She worked for Times Group in Bangalore and Delhi. She was an editor at Femina for over a dozen years before turning freelance. She is now an independent writer and manuscript editor, as well as the author of 4 books, a collection of short stories titled Kith and Kin, Chronicles of a Clan, her novel No Strings Attached, her nonfiction work A Gluten Free Life, and her second novel, A Start of Affair. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you.
We also thrilled to have with us Mahima Kukreja. Mahima is a feminist content creator, copywriter, and performer from New Delhi. She has written and been parts of ads, films, campaigns, panels, and sketches. Her work centers around women's rights, youth culture, feminism, mental health, and more. She has been featured in Forbes 2019 W Power Trailblazers list along with Priyanka Chopra, Mary Kom, Menika Guruswamy, and others. She was awarded her award by Facebook in association with UN by Barkha Dutt for contribution to feminist spaces and the Me Too movement. She has been featured in Cosmopolitan, Oprah Winfrey's Issue, New York Times, Elle, Grazia, and many other publications. Welcome, Mahima.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So, in today's session, we will be looking at portrayal of women as vamps across pop culture and media. The concept of the vamp is as old as humanity itself. In the earliest myths and religious ideas, we can find traces of the archetype of the vamp or femme fatale. These women, from being discerned as a wise crone and a devouring mother, soon became the despised witch and the hag after the trampling of the matriarchal religions. And eventually, the vamp became synonymous with the bewitching, sultry temptresses of youth who uses her sexual magnetism and female power to seduce and even to kill. So, with that, now I would like to welcome our speakers to comment upon how they think this binary of representing women as goddesses and damsels or vamps came to exist, and how they think popular culture fits into this. Sheila, ma'am, would you like to begin?
Okay. Well, out west, it's the Madonna and the whore binary, right? Which all of us know.
Yes.
But let me make this an India-specific response. So here, what we have is Mother India. Stacey, a very iconic film where the heroine she literally exemplifies Mother India. I mean,
Right.
the
Yeah.
eponymous title says it all. And then you have an archetypal vamp, capital V, the kind who has never been replicated in all these years since. Her name was Helen. So you have a Mother India, and then you have a Helen. Black is black, white is white, no nuances, and the lines just don't blur. And here is the main thing. The point is, it's just basically a moral science lesson. And I think women, as women, all of us have got it years and years ago. The men, I'm not too sure. The moral science lesson is you can either be a demure devi or you can be a deadly diva. I mean, this is literally quote unquote. That's how they see these two binaries, this dichotomy.
Hmm.
You can't, you just can't be both. That's the it's a patriarchal world. That's the way they've set up the whole thing. But there's been a pushback, of course, but not then. At that point, I think pretty much women, we are talking what, 60s, 70s, 80s, right up to the 80s, pretty much the whole country absorbed the lesson quietly and followed. It's just the way they want to.
Right.
But not literature, never literature. Again, India specific. You had a very famous poetess called Amrita Preetham, very very out there poetry. She just literally hung her emotions out there for everyone to see, literally.
Yeah.
Then you had a very bold, again, bold I'm using in the ironic sense. Okay, back then it was considered bold. A very bold writer called Kamla Das, who talked about sex and the kind of things you just couldn't talk back then. So, like, my point is that literature has always pushed back. Hurrah for literature. I don't know about the others. But the pushback came in cinema, which I'm sure the rest of you all will agree. I think with Madhuri Dixit, she kind of embraced her less than goody goody role. So, you even had, and then as it went on, you had this really sexy ad that absolutely grabbed eyeballs of two famous Uber models of that time, Madhu Sapre and Milind Soman. Both were in the nude, and they just had this python draped sinuously between them. And it was such a lovely, it really was a lovely ad. There wasn't much of a hue and cry. Today, that old binary is back. You can either be a demure diva or you can be a deadly, deadly diva or a demure devi. And so you have very puerile ads. You have Alia Bhatt riding. She's a young and very popular actress, Stacy. So you have her riding a scooter, and I'm watching this because I have an advertising copywriter background, and I'm thinking, oh, they're celebrating a woman in 2022 riding a scooter. But that's just what they are doing, because you have another ad where a woman throws, supposedly a joke, throws knives in an irate manner at her husband. She was trolled, the ad was trolled. You have another wonderful ad where, the woman, traditionally in India, the bride is given away, Kanya Dan. But here, the bride refuses to be given away like that. The
Right.
her husband too decides to be given away, trolled, removed. Then you have sanitary napkins that read men. I don't know who else is uncomfortable seeing sanitary napkin ads. Then you have a jewelry ad where a Muslim mother-in-law is holding a Hindu ritual for her Hindu daughter-in-law. Trolled, total remove. Have you noticed one thing? The women are at center stage in all these ads. I rest my case.
Thank you, ma'am. Stacy and Mahima, would you like to add something?
I think it's a little bit more complicated. Like the idea of like here we think about it as the Madonna horn. I think it's becoming a little bit more complicated. This idea, like there's a lot more pushback in not just literature, but also in movies and also in like even music. But I do think you make a really good point, Sheila, about this idea that where there might have been progress, we're kind of seeing a return to this same dichotomy. I definitely have seen that here too. And I think when we think about the sexual revolution of the 60s as being this like huge cultural turning point, but that was very quickly followed by this like repressive, like sex negative idea. And then there was a rise of sex positive feminism, I would say in like the late 90s, early 2000s, that I don't think has had the same kind of backlash now, but I think there's definitely still those feelings that are embedded into not just the content or the art that men are creating, but also the things that women are created. Like, I don't know if you saw this or remember this, but last year around this time, Billie Eilish came out with, she was going to debut a new era of her, like her music career. And until then, Billie Eilish had very famously rejected a lot of the sexualization that young women are not just kind of subjected to, but are embracing themselves. So she wore baggy clothing. she really famously was not talking about or trying to think of herself as a publicly sexual being. And then at last year, she decided she was going to debut this new era that really took cues from old Hollywood from an aesthetic perspective. So, like platinum blonde hair and like corsets and all of these kind of signifiers of sexuality. And she received a lot of criticism for that, which is complicated in itself because what we actually want is for young women to embrace their sexuality. We want them to feel comfortable thinking of themselves as complete human beings who aren't just one thing or the other. But at the same time, she was also buying into this like very well established, very well entrenched model of explaining that you're a grown up by essentially putting yourself on display for consumption as a sexual being. And that's like something that's very, not exclusively young women, but very, very centered on young women. So I think it's like maybe not as stark a difference on sort of this kind of in Western culture, but it's definitely still there.
Thanks.
I think like Sheila and Stacy did a really good job covering most of the stuff that needs to be covered. I just think there's one more thing that we need to sort of think about when we think about the cultural mindset and what's changing is both here in India and abroad in West. Uh, there has been a rise of fascism
Yes.
and this push against for example in India it's Hindu khatre mein hai, which is the idea that traditional Hindu families are in danger, and
Mm-hmm.
obviously since the woman is the part of the essence of what holds the family together, and she needs to marry into upper caste Hindu families and produce nice upper caste Hindu children.
Hindu
And the
babies.
same in West, which is now this whole white supremacy issue that's now a part of the culture, where trans women and LGBTQ people and mixed families, biracial families, all of that is there's a pushback against that. So parallelly, I believe in India and abroad there's pushback against any sort of a family dynamic where it's not suiting your narrative of a white high class woman or or a Hindu upper caste woman. And so in culture that's reflecting too. I think that's why we are regressing a little bit, because there's a lot of push from fascist ideologies, governments, and people, and this push that women now need to create the perfect family, and hence she has to be a good woman. And that's reflecting in the culture, that's reflecting in the sitcoms we are seeing and the movies we are seeing.
Yeah.
And the voices of dissent now, which were till 10 years back like completely normal for them to show those kind of characters with their complex characters in movies and books, that's also, there's a lot of more trolling, a lot of more flack that you're getting, a lot more almost abusive sort of this
Very
barrage
abusive.
Yeah.
you have to sort of just deal with. So that's, I think, one thing we also need to look at.
Yeah. That's a really good point.
Thanks, Mahima. So, while damsels represent the domestic culture and tradition, the vamps were given the other women aesthetic with a loud stereotyping to symbolize the creeping of foreign influence. Would you like to talk about that as well, Sheila ma'am?
Me? Okay. Yeah. Well, at this point, I have to confess one thing that since the past year, I have been hopelessly addicted to K dramas. So, to the exclusion of any normal, so I
Great.
don't watch television, I don't watch, Hindi movies. But yes, I do. I'm a Malayali. I'm from Kerala in the south of the country, and we make some cutting edge films, even if I should say so myself. So yes, I do watch that, and I would like to talk about um, one film which was a huge attention grabber last year, released last year, and it's won a lot of awards abroad. It's called The Great Indian Kitchen. Would either Snigdha or Mahima have seen it? I don't know. Have you? Would you have seen it? No.
Not yet,
It's,
but I
it's
have
like
read all of it.
amazing.
Yeah, I've
Okay,
read all
so
of
I
it.
mean, it's pretty much what's happening to women in India now. So, Stacy, you do know that we still go strong with the quote unquote arranged marriage concept. So, there's
Yeah.
this girl, she's young, bright, intelligent, well educated, and her horoscope happens to match with some guy, and she's married
Yeah.
off to him, and she's okay. She's quite curious about the whole institution of marriage. She's up for whatever the experience is. So she enters it in a very positive manner. Now, the guy is what you would call a well meaning boor. I don't know if you have that kind of an animal actually, because actually, in his own way, he's quite fond of her, but he is an average Indian male, well on his way to embracing patriarchy. So
Right.
it's really hilarious, but it's very black humor. She finds her whole life confined to that great Indian kitchen in her marital home, which is anything but great, okay? Slaving over the stove, the kind of things that Betty Friedan and Germaine Greer were talking about years back in the 60s.
Yeah.
That was her life. And she puts up with it for as long as she can. One fine day, she just gets up and walks out of the kitchen, out of her marital home, out of her marriage. So that's what I can say about, that's the kind of movies where you're seeing a very nice pushback. And it's not that people for whom this pushback is directed to, they're getting it too. So that's really good. But let's talk about literature. Literature, like I said, has always pushed back. Literature has been at the forefront of smashing a lot of stereotypes. There you have less suffering women and more women who are breaking the shackles of their circumstances. They break free and move into another life, not necessarily a better life, but it's okay. They've broken free from whatever was holding them back. Now this could be Anna Karenina, this could be the classics, this could be Joe, Meg, Amy, and Beth from Little Women. By the way, I hate that title. I cannot think of a more patriarchal title than Little Women. But anyway, you have Katniss Everdeen of the Hunger Games. You have Elizabeth Salander,
Yeah.
the girl with the dragon tattoo. You even have the vapid Bella Swan. Okay, I mean she does break out of something, right?
Yeah. Okay.
You know what I mean?
She gets there. She gets there.
It could be a puerile pushback, it could be a meaningful pushback, but they are pushing back. Then you have Hermione Granger from the Harry Potter. I'm giving you, the more popular things that people generally read. I am a book critic. I review a whole lot of books for a whole lot of publications. And just about, I would say, and this is a very heartening thing, a good 90% of the women in these books are pushing back. So, hurrah for literature. That's my point.
Mahima, would you like to add something?
I mean, I've, in a way, where Sheila was mentioning embracing K-dramas, I feel like women are not afraid of embracing a side of them, which is mostly, seen as the weaker side of them. Like, it's cringe to like Taylor Swift or to like BTS or to watch K-dramas. And I've been, I love reading young adult, and the fantasy genre is my favorite. And obviously the people will be telling you that you're not good enough if you're reading fantasy YA. But even in that, I've seen like these new protagonists in the books. They're all young women. They're all not afraid of owning their femininity or their sexuality, or just having like little shades of gray in them, where it's not like you don't have to be like goody two shoes. Like, I've seen a shift from Hermione Granger to like, say, Sarah J. Maas's protagonists who are like fae warriors, who are like having sex with 3 different men in the same book, but also like fighting monsters and dealing with their own personal mental crisis at the same time. So so for culture that's that young adults are consuming these days through books, movies, etc., I feel like there's a little bit of a change in the way we are showing how an empowered woman looks like. So, and that's true for Indian authors and abroad as well. So there's something that I've noticed in my last 20 years of reading, I've been reading a lot, and that's something I've sort of seen happening.
But while on
Thank
this, can
you.
I put a question to the panelists? Just how much of this reflects real life? I'm curious.
Uh,
No,
if
go
you
ahead,
would
go ahead.
if you would believe this, I remember I was always a very outspoken feminist, and hence a point of contention in my family, to a point where my mother would tell me to not speak when we go to other people's houses, because I'll end up fighting with somebody over something stupid, extremely sexist, misogynistic, patriarchal, they would say. And I remember this conversation with my cousin, some 7, 8, 10 years ago, where I was talking about how I expect equality in relationships, and even the man I'm going to marry is going to have to contribute equally in the house, be it through chores or finances or whatever it is, that I see it as an equal partnership. And she said, it's easier to say that you're a feminist, and it's easier to claim that you want equality, but you can't really expect your husband to cook for you, do you? And fast forward to now, where the same cousin is now married, and in a much more feminist household that I anticipated, uh, where she was so strongly against the idea of pushing back through those patriarchal notions, and now I see slightly more of an equitable relationship that they have. So slowly I
It's
see some,
working.
yeah,
Yeah.
slowly we're not fully there, yeah, but yeah, the young generation does not care. I mean, these 16-year-old, 20-year-olds, they are really pushing back against their families, and they're very strongly opinionated, and they have a thing to say, and they say it, and it's so wonderful to watch young feminists be so outspoken.
Three
And
cheers for them.
not to bring men into it, but like I do think the way to further the feminist cause is that you have to get everybody on board. And so I'm 36 and my brother is a lot younger than I am, and he's 23. So when I see what he and his friends are talking about, it's very different even from what my male friends were talking about at that age. Like my brother is very outspoken, his friends are very outspoken. There's a lot more understanding of nuances of gender, of like my brother loves to cook. Like there's all of these things that even something as silly as like my brother's favorite hoodie is like this pink hoodie from H&M. And when I was, maybe not when I was 23, but when I was like 17, 18, 19, I'm not sure that the boys that were around my same age were as like they were always going to be worried about what it meant that they were wearing pink. Like there was a very big thing, even when I was a lot younger, there was this very big thing about if you were a boy who got your ears pierced, then depending on where you, like which ear you pierced, that said something about your sexuality. Like all of these very silly things that like we knew they were silly then, but we were really constrained by like that's what the rules of the society said. I think my brother would just like burst out laughing if I said that. Like they don't care. They're not perfect, but
so even when it comes to sexuality, right, like I believe that people now who are in their 30s or whatever, if they've discovered some stuff about their sexuality, it took them a whole decade.
It's 9:00.
It was a whole conversation of 10 years, 15 years to realize that now you're 16 and you're not discovering you're bisexual, you're telling people you're bisexual. You're not discovering you're non-binary, you already have your pronouns in your bio. And that's the change that you can immediately see in just 10 years of the generation gap.
But Mahima, incremental change. It's happening, in dibs and dabs.
Very much so. But what I'm
excited
to see though is, so I had a lot of friends who I felt like, male friends as well, who I felt like were maybe not claiming the title of feminist, but were behaving in pretty feminist ways. They cared a lot about equality. They were shocked when we said that women were not making the same amount of money, like all of those things. But I think my generation is still in this reality of when kids enter the equation, a lot of the childcare and a lot of the emotional labor, even from the most progressive men, still I think falls on the female partner in a relationship. And obviously this is like very heteronormative. It's very binary, but that's kind of what I'm seeing. I'm really interested to see what it looks like when today's young people grow up and decide that they're going to start families and have children, because, and I think you're right, Sheila, it's very much incremental, but my hope is that because it's incremental, it's also sustainable. Like when I look back at, I've worked in Canadian magazines for 15 years. When I look at the things that we would never cover 15 years ago, the things that I cared so much about, but I never thought I would ever see in a mainstream publication. And I'm Indo-Caribbean. We moved here from Trinidad. Okay. My whole family has always read Chatelaine, for example, which is this huge women's magazine. But when I started working at Chatelaine, there was nothing in those pages that looked anything like us. Even though my aunt had been reading Chatelaine since she moved here in like the 70s. That had at that point been like 40 years of watching this publication and loving it and being loyal to it, but it not reflecting you. Today, Chatelaine is very different. Today, Chatelaine is way more political, way more diverse. So I think sometimes when you can stop and look back at how different things are even from 10 years ago, that is a point of hope, I think. Because imagine, like, I can't even imagine what will happen 10 years from now.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I have a question for Sheila, ma'am. We have witnessed in Indian television where two people are in love and the man has to marry someone else under some kind of pressure. The ex-lover immediately becomes a vamp and the wife steps up on a higher moral ground. So plots such as this are used in Indian television to the point of being hackneyed. What are your observations?
Bit of a problem here. Like I told you, I don't think I have watched Indian soaps, Indian television for maybe more than 2 decades now. So I really wouldn't know what's happening. But once in a while, pop culture being what it is, what I see, I just back off fast. Very glad to be watching, fluff elsewhere in Seoul rather than in India. So I really wouldn't be in a position to give you a very definitive answer about that.
Mahima, would you like to say something about that?
I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it? Every time I accidentally watch a scene of a soap, Indian soap, I just straight up lose my mind. It's 2022. There are entire scenes where you accidentally touch something and then the goes flying and the sindoor lands on another woman and now she's married to that man and the nice woman that he was with is now suddenly no longer in the picture. It's ridiculous. I try not to
Stacy,
watch.
is this blowing your mind?
Oh, trust
Well,
me.
it's actually, none of this is like that unfamiliar. My best friend is South Asian, and like I said, I'm Indo-Caribbean, so none of this is like weird. Don't worry.
So, but that binary of being the evil woman and the good woman in Indian soaps are still very much, I mean, so strongly rooted in patriarchy and so very, contrastingly strong portrayals, like one who's the virgin and the maiden and the good girl, and she just says yes to all the things her family tells her to do. And then there's a vamp who has her own agency and she owns her sexuality and she wears revealing clothes and she dares to like a man out of her own violation, and then obviously she is the bad woman and she is the villain. And so that is very, very I would say strongly rooted in binaries with the portrayal. So that hasn't changed in Indian
If I
soaps.
may offer up something for, food for thought, what soaps are showing are lapped up, right? So they are finding a resonance with the audience. So I'm saying this with a lot of dismay, but this is the truth. isn't it? So, I mean, we can say what we want to say, but sometimes I think we are operating from an echo chamber. It's just us saying, yeah, you're right, it's bad. It's like, you talk about the country's politics, it's the same thing, it's just an echo chamber. Out there, the masses are saying, hey, we like it, we like this rasoda, and we like this, God knows what, whatever. These women dressed up like they're going for weddings and wandering around the kitchen. Their great Indian kitchen, I guess, whatever. But, people like it.
Yeah. So along the same lines, I have a question. It's open to all the panelists. So we have seen how a sensational angle is integral to the portrayal of women. And what do you think? What does the over sexualization of the vamp have to do with the cinema audience relationship?
Uh, you know, when it comes to sexualization of women, it's, if you'll notice, it's written mostly by men and it's directed mostly by men, and so it's almost pandering to the male gaze to a point where that owning of her sexuality is not empowering for the woman anymore, because uh, when she comes on the screen, her appearance is an impact on how erotic and hot she is to the man who's watching it, and so the man also is sort of not threatened by it, because at the end of the day she's serving his male gaze. And um, so I think just severe representation issues when it comes to women writing, women directing, women being involved into creating these characters who are over sexualized, doing it in a way where it's actually empowering, or doing it in a way where it's just pandering to male gaze. That's the difference, I believe, and that's what's missing in both Western media and in India.
But if I may add something here, there are the stray movies. I remember seeing something called Anarkali of some place in UP with this tasty actress whom I like a lot, Swara Bhaskar, playing Anarkali, a dancer, a street dancer, Stacy, and obviously treated as a thing by all the rich politicians and the businessmen of this village that pretends, masquerades as a town. But she finds her agency and displays that agency to the audience by the end of the film. So yes, we do get a not woefully small amount, but we do get some movies where these so-called quote-unquote vamps have agency.
Some media, that's great. Great content is coming out.
Yeah.
We are mostly seeing it on streaming platforms, though, not too much on television. But streaming platforms, like producing smaller shows and smaller sitcoms, smaller movies where they're throwing money at teams who are doing that sort of work, and it's very small, but it's there. We can see that happening. I'll see it once in a while on Netflix or Amazon or stuff
or
like
something. But I also think it's a question of laziness in storytelling. Like Sheila made this point about how the masses are enjoying these movies and these shows that are, like, we know, problematic. But I think there's like many reasons for that. Like here, usually now it starts in October, but around Christmas, there's this like Hallmark cultural supremacy where there are these very cheesy romance novels romance movies that are like whipped out from a production standpoint. So they are written and produced, like filmed, edited, everything in a very short space of time. It's like 10 days of filming. It's not very long at all. The point is to get as much out there as possible. And I think that leads into a little bit of the tropes that get trotted out all the time, because when you have 10 days to shoot a movie, you don't really have a lot of time to like get into a character, right? You're not spending a lot. It's not about craft necessarily. It's just about pumping these things out. And so they often end up relying on these very lazy ideas that we're all familiar with. So I think that's part of it. It's also a part of like, what is the quality of content that is being produced? What is the quality of art that's being produced, and who's doing it definitely is part of that. But even if it's a female director, if she's working within this like Hallmark framework, she has to hit the beats that Hallmark says. Like, it's also about how much freedom you have as a creator to actually change the way these stories are told.
But you know what? Hey, you can do this and still be interesting. I mean, I know
Absolutely.
whereof I talk because I've written 2 relationship novels. I own it, and it's selling. If people like it, I mean, you can talk about love, you can talk about relationships, you can do it really interestingly. But Stacey, you're so
Absolutely.
right. I've been
But
seeing these Christmassy fare for about 2, 3 years now and wondering, God, it's just getting worse, damn it.
worse and worse. The dialogue is bad. But
Yeah,
I do think, to your point, there's something. So I, full like total confession, like Mahima, I mostly read YA fiction and romance because I write so much about the news that I'm like, no, I can't. I just need something nice where a woman saves the world and then she like falls in love with someone lovely who makes her tea and takes care of her. Like that's what I have space for in my head. But
Stacey, yes.
within that, right? Like exactly. I just want nice things. I
all
want
of
something
us.
joyful to read. But within that, especially if you're reading Western romance novels, there's a whole move towards diversifying and like really politicizing it so that it's still a story that you love, but and it's still a story about love, but these characters don't exist just to fall in love. They have other interests,
Yeah,
they care about
yeah,
different things. Like there
yeah.
are stories that are being told that you can get that like the dopamine hit of, oh look, these very attractive people, they fell in love. Like you still get the fantasy without losing that other side of it where you're looking at like whole human beings.
I mean, I just recently read Red, White, and Royal Blue, and it's
Oh my
about
god, so
okay.
good.
So it's about this guy
I've
who's
read
the
it.
son of the U.S. president who
Yeah.
falls in love with the monarchy. He is in love with the Prince of England, and so there's a whole privileged class, obviously rich, good-looking, uber popular men characters, and in the background they're still talking about how she's a woman who's a president. She comes from a red state, and the guy is fully aware that the prince is fully aware that the crown is built on rape, pillaging, and colonization and all of those things. And so there is awareness um, in the characters, the privilege that they come from, and the atrocities their ancestors have committed. And so, having said that, such a cute romantic story
It is.
where there's always also like this fun banter, and the two smart young kids, and just whole sort of stuff like that. And I feel like that's doing a great job of selling the serotonin and dopamine hit,
Yeah.
but also not giving my mind something to think about. So yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. So, my next question is open to all the panelists. How do you think the representation of the figure of femme fatale has evolved in pop culture, from being a villain to a model of agency and intelligence?
Should I go first?
Yeah,
Age
you should.
Yes.
before beauty. Well, it harks back to my main point that this is pushback time. So a great deal, as we've established now, a great deal of pushing back is being done. So that vamp woman, she stepped off that rotating dais with the strobe lights on her, and she's decided to walk amongst us. The femme fatale, she's become a person of great beauty, elegance, power. She follows that creed that if you have it, flaunt it. She uses her sex appeal to get her a better job, to get her the man that she wants, to get her all the material things her heart desires. So now you have the vamp totally owning their image. They dress the part, they behave as outrageously as they want. I've seen this on shows, and to some extent, like I said, not too much, but an encouraging amount of it out on the streets too. So yes, that's good, isn't it?
Would Stacy and Mahima like to say something regarding this?
Yeah, I think the idea of a femme fatale is like still very well represented in media, but when you look at actual celebrities, like I'm a huge fan of Rihanna. And I think Rihanna, if she had come out in like the 90s, would maybe not be, I think she would have to adhere to more archetypical ideas about who she is. But instead, she like I kind of joke that no female pop stars these days wear pants. Like pants are not a thing. So she's going out, she's like dressing very sometimes scandalously, like quote unquote scandalously. Her one of her businesses is a lingerie company. She is often seen wearing her lingerie, but you don't think of Rihanna as a femme fatale. You don't think of her as a vamp, and I think that comes into her like wider persona. It's not just about the music she creates, which does touch on sex. It's not just about her like public image, which is very sexy. There's also this part of her brand that is about being a strong businesswoman. There's a part of her brand that is about being an advocate and an ally to marginalized communities. She does a lot of charity work, and all of that. Like, I think she is able to transcend this idea of what a femme fatale looks like or what a vamp looks like. Like, I don't think anyone would say, oh, Rihanna's trying to be sweet and innocent. Instead, she's trying to be a complete human being. And even I would say someone like Ariana Grande, who does adhere very, very closely to these ideas about what aesthetically innocence looks like, she is complicating it because she's also talking about sex and relationships and like complicated feelings in her music. And like that is maybe a whole other thing because there is some catering to the male gaze there, I think. And this idea of like sexualizing youth and innocence is weird and problematic. Like that continues to be a thing. But I do think there's still, you can't dismiss Ariana Grande's agency and her decisions of her aesthetic. And so there's these two different people who are taking two different aesthetic approaches, but are still trying to do the same thing. Like they're kind of meeting in the middle because they are trying to be whole human beings. And that to me is where the progress is happening.
Stacy, what about Gaga?
Gaga's fascinating. I think in some ways though, Gaga is not, I don't think she's, even though she's often like semi-nude and doing like things that might be read as sexualized, I often don't think of her as sexualized because she's so avant-garde in many ways. And she's so, it seems like she's like performance art sometimes more than.
And these little flashes of her vulnerability, it's very appealing. It's part of the whole woman.
Absolutely. And she's probably become a lot more like mass in terms of like, especially at the beginning of her career, she was so avant-garde. And I think a lot of people were like, a meat dress, I don't know what to do with that. And now she's certainly like softened a little bit and become more kind of like, there's more wide appeal happening there. But even so, I don't know that her performance of sexuality is as actually deep. I don't know how connected it is to actual sexuality. Like, I think sometimes for me, at least from my perspective, it really looks like a performance in a way that is like not as easily accessible as other female celebrities' performance of sexuality.
I feel like there's been a lot of change in the way we portray women who are femme fatales in the movies and just in pop culture. I believe earlier there used to be a more of a, like an excuse to why you are the way you are, like a whole damaged backstory of taking revenge on your parents' death and you've been raped or you've been wronged as a child, and also over sexualization in the way where you're killing people but your boobs are out at all times,
all the time.
Yeah, so like that sort of like just this terrible trope of like this femme fatale being actually really weak in the mind because she is doing this just for revenge, and also at all times she's wearing lingerie while fighting the bad guys. Versus now, I feel like, in fact, in some of the Marvel movies, for example, Miss Marvel herself is she's not over sexualized, and there's no damaging rape or murder or backstory in a sense where there's no excuse, like there's no reason for her to be strong why she's strong. but she's strong because she's just strong and she wants to make the world a better place, and she's fighting guys, bad guys, and making the earth more like rid of the bad guys in general. And so that slight arc that I've noticed, that I mean we've all seen in I think the femme fatale thing started in 60s when these women were getting lead roles, and then they were overly sexualized and very violent, and there was a whole reason why they were violent, versus now where some of these women are strong because they are strong and not because they have a tragic backstory, or they have a point to prove. They're just strong and they're just doing good stuff. So there's a definite improvement.
What do you girls think about Wonder Woman?
Oh, I
Gal
have a lot of
Gadot.
thoughts. I have a
The
lot
one
of thoughts about Gal
directed,
Gadot.
the one directed by the woman was slightly better versus the
Yeah.
other one. In both the way she
I
was.
find her problematic,
I
Yeah,
find Gal
it
Gadot
is.
quite
It is
problematic.
problematic.
Her agency is problematic. Her dressing is problematic. And, I mean,
Gal
the
Gadot
whole
is
thing.
problematic to
I was just
begin
gonna
with.
say the actor is a
She backs
problem.
a state that supports apartheid, so in itself, that's a whole problem. So
No, that's a different argument
That's a different
altogether.
thing. But I
Yeah.
do think it's related because even in the second Wonder Woman, like that kind of Western imperialism also is part of the movie.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
like I do think they're connected, but
Yeah.
like I think Wonder Woman is a man's idea of what a female
Totally,
superhero looks
totally.
like, right? Like always.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Which is why I love literature, because a lot of these protagonists are written by women, and they're not pandering to a male gaze, and they just have more agencies. I love seeing 16, 17-year-old girls not giving a fuck and just living their lives. That's
Yes.
my
Absolutely.
favorite form of feminism. I
Yeah.
just live your life. Just love BTS and live your life. It's great.
Yeah, agree.
Snigdha, are we going way off script here?
No, it's very like I don't even have to moderate. It's so smooth. You all are in rhythm. So my final question to the panelists. So there has been a disruption of the narrative that the words like vamp and witches can only be used in a pejorative way. We now see women with agency owning words like vamps and witches to take control. Not just that, if we are to look at gothic fashion that was earlier, which was being used to create this other woman aesthetic is now being used as a trend of power dressing. So what are your observations on that?
It's just liberating, isn't it? Like just owning your um I know, presenting yourself to the world where you see fit, and be it emo, be it gothic, be it witchy, it's just, I think, also in a way saying fuck you to patriarchy, because women who do dress like that are not good girls, you know
Yeah.
by a majority of what the society and their families think. So I think it's just a way of asserting their self, and having that self expression to be, this is who I am, and I do not care what you think of me as. I think it's just a fun way to express yourself, and express your individuality a lot, and really um, make yourself different from other people that you may not necessarily see yourself being a part of their set of values and principles. It's just fun, I think.
Yes, I agree. I also think it's just nice for women who often are told that power is not something for us to explicitly say, I'm interested in power. I want to be powerful. I
Yeah.
want to dress in the way that I want to dress. And like I actually, not even about specifically gothic dressing or emo or whatever, but I'm spending like a problematic amount of time on TikTok. And what's so nice, like to your point about just seeing 16, 17-year-olds do whatever, it's so nice to see like the thing about TikTok is authenticity. So there's a lot of people who aren't wearing makeup, they aren't dressing in a particular way, And my kind of recent favorite trend is the people who are like, sorry, just because I am not wearing makeup at this moment does not mean that I don't love makeup. And then suddenly come out with like a full face. They know, they're like 13 and know all their angles and know all of the techniques. And I love that because again, it's this idea that you don't just have to be one thing. Like, I don't wear makeup every day, but when I was gonna come and be on this camera, I put some makeup on, and that's like fine, that's allowed. And so,
And
right, like seeing young women do that, I think is so exciting.
And also because Stacey, if you've noticed, like a lot of the times where families and societies and schools in India especially set the rules of how you're supposed to look,
Yes.
a certain way where you're supposed to wear this, your skirt has to be this length, you're not supposed to wear makeup, your hair is supposed to be this way. And so in a way it's really like like through actions and not words, just
Yes.
saying like I do not conform to you, and this is who I am, and this is how I see myself as different from the rest of you, and I'm going to show you how I see myself as. And
Yeah.
that's walls. Like I could be emo at 18 and suddenly I'm dressing a lot more. I used to have blue hair. So you
Yes.
know
Yeah.
it doesn't take away like who I am inside, but at that point of time where I was 22 and I needed to assert myself, and I felt like blue hair was the way to do it. I did it, and
Yes.
it annoyed a lot of people, but again, like that's what gave me pleasure. So I just think, you know,
And to your
that's
point,
it.
like that has nothing to do with who I think still lots of people still have an idea of that our like external expression has a lot to do with who we are inside when actually external expression is often just creativity. It's just
Yeah,
another way to try something else. But like there's no way that our makeup is gonna fully represent or our hair is fully gonna represent the totality of who we are. Like we're complex human beings. So and
agreed.
like it's fun to do that then. It's fun to and the other point of like just seeing what these young women are doing, for the longest time I had so many insecurities about and still have so many insecurities about my body and my appearance and whatever. And then I see these young women and especially the young women that I teach, you're so cool. You have such cool outfits. Like I love seeing that because I didn't necessarily feel free to be that open about this type of creativity. I was trying to conform because I didn't want to stand out because I didn't want people to think I was weird or ugly or whatever. And it took me until I was literally 30 to say, "Oh, that's dumb." And here are these young
Yeah,
women who are right like that's actually ridiculous. Don't do
yeah.
that. These like young women are half my age and they know and they have it
They're
and
so
it's so
cool.
good to see.
They're so bloody cool, really.
Yeah.
It is so fun to see it, and sometimes I wish I could just go back 10 years, go back to school, and then just be fairy core and gothic
Yeah.
core and
And
mo-
whatever.
academia aesthetic, and just do like these things again. Yeah,
Yes.
it's just amazing how young women use their, use fashion to subvert a lot of expectations of what a good girl or a bad girl looks like, and just be like, this
Yes.
is me, and not my fashion which makes me good or bad, so
And
that's really
actually, the idea of a good or bad girl is also kind of nonsensical. Like, that's not a
good.
thing. There, right? Like, even I sometimes feel like that's the message too. That like, I'm not a good or bad girl because those things don't exist. Which I don't know that I would have been able to make that leap at that age. So that is also what's so exciting to me.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think Sheila ma'am is facing some technical issues. Um, I'm not sure if I should wait for her, but yeah, women have been dismantling this long-standing patriarchal prejudices to break away from the stereotypical representations that has long overshadowed in pop culture and media for centuries. And the very tools that the society and like the media use to oppress are now being used as tools to self-express, almost like an Uno reverse in real life. So, yeah. I would like to thank all our speakers today. Sheila ma'am is not here, but it was a pleasure to engage with you all. And with that, I will be wrapping today's session. Thanks for joining. Stay tuned for our next episode on disobedient women in Indian mythology. A reminder that tellmeyourstory.biz calls for submissions on the story from Disobedient Women. Other than that, registrations are also open for the Writing Program Season 5 in association with Yuba Publications. Till then, stay well, stay safe, stay together, though distanced. Good night.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Good
Thank
Thank
night.
you
you. Thank you so much.
for connecting me to such cool women. I will find both of you after this.
Yes,
Sheila Kumar is
definitely.
back
Yeah, so will I. Bye, girls.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
now.
Take care.